Welcome to the College of Human Sciences and Humanities Presents, a video-based lecture series featuring the work of faculty from the largest of the four colleges at the University of Houston, Clear Lake. I'm Interim Dean Samuel Gladden. The College of HSH features almost 30 academic programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels. Our disciplines are diverse, and our remarkable faculty are committed to innovation, intersectionality, interdisciplinarity, and collaborations in research with other faculty and students. The work of our faculty exemplifies cutting-edge scholarship that is directly responsive to issues that beset us in politics, culture, and health. As you will see in this video series, our faculty are collegial and collaborative, and they are deeply invested in the work of their colleagues, as the cross-departmental pairings of moderators and presenters in this series demonstrate. For more information on our college or any of the work featured in this series, write to us at hsh@uhcl.edu. And now, the College of Human Sciences and Humanities presents.
Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Dr. Angela Kelling, and I'm an assistant professor of psychology and lucky enough to have been in the cohort that went through the writing focus faculty provided or put on by Dr. Jacobs. So I have been selected to moderate this evening and introduce her. So happy International Women's Day. I'm delighted to introduce an amazing woman at UHCL. Lorie Stagg Jacobs, who received her PhD at the University of Texas at Arlington in 2014. She is an assistant professor of writing at UHCL, where she teaches first year and professional writing courses. She currently serves as the Writing and the Disciplines Coordinator, directing faculty professional development in the teaching of writing campus-wide, and she's the director of first year writing. Since 2018, she's been serving as an associate editor with Compile, the most extensive database of scholarship in post-secondary composition, writing studies, technical and professional writing, and rhetorical studies. Lorie is published and presented on a variety of topics, including discipline and profession-specific writing curriculum, labor issues in academia, first-year composition, and student persistence. Today's talk emerges from FRSF-funded study that's an extension of her collaboration with Dr. Patricia Droz, Genre Chameleon, Email Professional Writing Curriculum, and Workplace Writing Expectations, published in Technical Communication in 2019. And it was nominated as the best article of the year in technical writing pedagogy at the Conference on College Composition and Communication. Throughout the, I'm going to turn it over to her in just a second, but please, if you have any questions, enter them into the Q&A because you may have noticed you're all muted. Lorie, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Share my screen. Thank you, Dr. Kelling, for those wonderful words. And thanks to all of you for joining me today. In an era dominated by electronic communication, today's culture is more literate and text-dependent than ever. Workplace professionals encounter widely varied and infinitely mutable written communication tasks on a daily basis. My talk today is responsive to these ever-changing communication needs and the resulting implications for college curriculum and students' career preparedness. I will attempt to shed light on what our graduates can expect when they enter the workplace and how we as instructors and curriculum designers can help address these expectations. The title today is What Employers Want Professional Writing in UHCL's Top 4 Majors. This study emerges from national conversations about writing and demands of the workplace. The American Association of Colleges and Universities has highlighted the importance of writing for success in college, naming discipline-specific writing-intensive courses as one of 10 high-impact practices. In addition, the AAC&U, seeking to understand what employers expect of new graduates, surveyed 1,000 executives and hiring managers. As part of the Liberal Education and America's Promise, or the LEAP initiative, AAC&U periodically commissions national surveys to examine trends related to college graduates and the most important learning experiences and outcomes they need to successfully navigate the global economy. As I'm sure most of you are aware, they are specifically focused on liberal education. In 2018, the Association of American Colleges and Universities reported results from a poll of 1,000 executives and hiring and managers, and found that 82% of them rated written communication as a top priority for college graduates entering the job market. One conclusion from the AACU report is that written communication, along with critical thinking and problem solving, are more important than a student's major for determining long-term success. In addition, this study found that future employers were reasonably confident that recent graduates have the skills to get hired. However, fewer of them were confident that new graduates had the necessary skills to earn a promotion. It is this question of tenure and promotion that became a focus point in my research. And one goal of the study presented today was to get a local and more nuanced perspective on these nationwide trends. A few years ago, my colleague Patricia Droz and I surveyed area hiring managers to verify that our professional writing curriculum met the needs of local employers. That study appeared in Technical Communication in the February 2019 issue. And in that one, we used a grounded theory approach. We gathered data in 2 stages using a mixed method design of interviews and questionnaires. We found that all salaried employees have implicit or explicit job descriptions that include writing. 80% of respondents indicated that their respective companies require 3/4 or more of salaried employees to produce formal workplace writing as defined as technical reports, memos, annual reports, and external communications. In addition, 94% of our respondents said the effective written communication of professional or salaried employees is highly important to promotion decisions. And we found that this was echoed in the study under discussion today. So I'm going to come back to that a little bit more in greater detail shortly. So another goal of this study of the current study was to identify profession or field-specific perceptions of workplace writing and graduate readiness, because this is an area that is underexplored in all 4 fields. The literature is surprisingly sparse in each of these, and many of the studies we found focus on sentence-level mechanics issues, which writing studies and literacy researchers consider one of the lower-order concerns, as opposed to rhetorical considerations such as audience, purpose, and thinking and being able to illustrate your point with evidence. However, there is widespread agreement among the disciplines that students should get more exposure to professional writing expectations while still in college. So in all 4 fields, accounting, education, healthcare administration, and psychology, there were calls amongst all of them that there should be more exposure for writing in the fields. So thus we sought to hear it, straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, and get a local perspective. And given Houston's diverse professional environment, we figured this was the perfect place to do this research. So we conducted group interviews of professionals currently employed within each of these top 4 majors. And we conducted these studies between June 2018 and February 2020. Thank goodness we got our last interviews in just before the pandemic, which was fortuitous. So methods, I want to tell you a little bit about the research team first. Dr. Droz and I initiated the project in 2018, seeking to expand our survey from the year prior. And but unfortunately, Dr. Droz left academic life in 2019, so I've been kind of doing it more by myself since then. Well, not by myself, but which you'll see in just a second. This project earned FRSF funding twice, which we used most of those funds for hiring graduate student support. And so thus our other team members are their 2 graduate students, Jenna Wood and Angela Pennington, and they did the work of transcribing the recorded interviews, and they also helped code the data. It was quite the undertaking. Jenna and Angela also worked with me to co-author one report that's come out of the study, and that is slated to appear in an edited collection on professional writing in healthcare professions sometime late this year or early next. It has been a labor of love for all of us. I'll tell you a bit about our participants. While Genre Chameleon helped us draw some conclusions about workplace writing in the general sense, we were curious about potential nuances and variations between and among the fields. You have to start somewhere. So we identified the top 4 majors at UHCL and began to think about how to interview professionals in the fields of education, accounting, psychology, and healthcare administration. Let me tell you that that alone was quite the project. It took ages and several false starts to get enough participants in one room. Trying to work with very busy working professionals was really challenging. Each discipline was different and required unique strategies. But eventually, we were able to interview 19 accountants, 8 teachers, 8 education administrators, 18 psychologists, and 22 healthcare administrators. With the exception of the teacher group, they were mostly experienced, well-established professionals in their respective fields. The vast majority had responsibility for supervising and mentoring new graduates. Our recruiting strategies varied by discipline. Most of our accountants, for example, were identified by a local conference, a local accounting conference that's held here in Houston, whereas the psychologists and healthcare administrators largely emerged via personal contacts. And then to summarize our process, we interviewed and transcribed in phase 1 of the project, and then phase 2 has been data analysis and reporting, and we're about halfway through that work. So the interviews and transcriptions were taking place between spring 2018, around May of 2018 through February 2020, and then the data analysis and reporting has been taking place since then, so basically March of 2020 till today, and is ongoing. So I should qualify this a little bit more to tell you that I am much more comfortable and confident talking about the findings from the healthcare administrators and the accountants, because those are the 2 I have worked with the most over this past year. But I was present at every single one of the interviews, so I am confident I can talk about all of the groups. The interviews were all semi-structured focus groups with a minimum of 3 participants to facilitate professional dialogue. The idea there being that writing is a very nuanced and difficult subject, and so we wanted our participants to be able to inform each other and feed off of each other to be able to develop a more extended dialogue on the topic, and that part worked beautifully. The largest of our groups was 12 participants. So we had somewhere between 3 and 12 in every group. So what did we learn? Initial findings suggest employers prefer graduates with strong communication skills over technical skills, and that written communication is essential for career advancement. Breaking that down a little bit further, there were kind of 3 big findings. The participants in our study expressed that writing occupies a large percentage of daily tasks, many claiming that they write all day, every day. There was consensus amongst our interviewees that writing is more important than ever for professionals for the obvious reasons of legality, accuracy, and efficiency. They said that they are just writing in various forms, ranging from text and emails to formal reports and proposals. In addition, effective workplace communication, much of which is written, is essential for upward mobility in all 4 professions, and a specific goal of mentoring in several cases, i.e. they would pair novice employees with more experienced employees for the express purpose of improving their written professional communication. Professionals repeatedly emphasized that the writing skills were important for their own personal success in their respective fields, and that in all 4 of professionals in all 4 fields agreed that writing well was essential for career advancement of any kind. And third, many interviewees stated they would prefer new hires with strong written communication skills over technical skills in their respective fields. We heard this most prominently with the accountants and the healthcare administrators, but they frequently noted that they felt it would be easier for them to support a new hire in the technical skills than the written skills. And yet, interestingly enough, those were the same groups that had express mentoring strategies in place, which I'll talk about in just one second. Okay, so here's some of the examples of the things that we heard from our interviewees. One psychologist told us that if we feel that person lacks communication skills, I think that would impact their ability to function well. They may be able to function, but they may not be able to function well in our field. And then a healthcare administrator told us, I'd say my top employees are always the best communicating employees, always. They go hand in hand, they correlate together. An accountant told us the person has to be technically strong to get hired, but in order to move up, they have to be able to write. And then another healthcare administrator told us, we're going to teach you the skills. We don't expect you to be experienced and know the skills because you're a new grad. All I'm looking for is a positive attitude and how you communicate. I thought that was a nice way to introduce you to some of their voices and hear some of the things that they had to say directly. And sorry, I went one too many. And then a sampling of some of the field specific findings, because in addition to thinking about the generalities that we were seeing between the fields, we also wanted to think about, well, what were we seeing that was unique to each field? And there were some trends that we are able to identify already. Some of them, psychologists were more confident and vocal in their opinions about the value of writing at the professional level. They also emphasized the life and death, and some of them used those specific words, importance of writing. In their minds, good writing could determine the futures of the people they were working with, and they took that responsibility very seriously. So that was interesting to hear them talk about. Both the accountants and the healthcare administrators had robust mentoring in place to support writing development. The accountants described reviewing drafts and providing detailed feedback. In fact, many of the firms, it was a requirement that junior associates were not allowed to send anything directly to a client, that they had to get it reviewed by somebody up higher up first, and that there would be multiple drafts involved as well, that they would go back and forth several times until they got it just right. Similarly, the healthcare administrators described using models, like they had collected samples of what some of the writing requirements would look like and put them in a binder. They also discussed, they actually also talked about the fact that they would have endless conversations about written expectations, and they would have specific mentoring meetings about those in order to support professional writing development. And the healthcare administrators also described having, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I hate it when that happens. But they were also talking about the ways in which they would provide opportunities for folks to learn more about the writing responsibilities of the next level up. So they would specifically engage their underlings in some of the writing requirements of the next level, so that that would help them develop and that they'd be ready for that promotion when it came along. The educators focused on frequent code switching and being able to communicate tactfully about difficult subjects or with difficult audiences. For them, the widely varying audiences was really front and center. And it was the administrators who pointed this out. This was actually one of the areas of the study. We interviewed the teachers really early on and quickly discovered that we really needed to talk to the administrators to get a sense of what was happening in terms of promotion and tenure. And it was the administrators who were able to point out that the need for code switching was really the sticking point in a lot of workplace communication situations. So they found that a new educator should be able to be adaptable. That would be something that would be really important for the job. And they would need to be able to anticipate the rhetorical situation and how it would vary throughout the day. So for example, you can imagine with teachers, how important it would be to be able to quickly switch from the voice one might need to talk to a student versus the one that you might need to talk to a coworker versus a parent versus an administrator. And they do this several times throughout the day. So this was, adaptability was really, really important for them. Okay, so what does that mean? I mean, there's, it really isn't, I thought it was important to, while I wanted to give you an idea of what some of the findings were, I think it's more important as educators that we think about, well, what does this mean for us and our students here at UHCL? So I want to spend the next bit of the presentation talking about what it means for us. So let's start by looking at one more thing from that AAC&U study of the 1,000 executives, and think about the slide here where they talk about the importance of communicating effectively in writing. That's that third bullet on the slide. And what this is showing us is that the employers felt that 76% of them felt that writing was very important, that on an either scoring an 8, 9, or 10 on a 0 to 10 scale. But what they didn't feel that their recent college grads were well prepared. Only 33% of them felt that they were well prepared when it came to communicating effectively in writing. So that delta is what's really interesting to me here, is that the employers are recognizing that written communication is really important for success in the workplace, but they do not feel that new graduates are coming to them fully prepared to do that work. And given that recent data, it has, in the interview data that I presented to you as well, this has significant implications for UHCL's curriculum, emphasizing the need to integrate meaningful professional writing opportunities throughout major coursework. So what might that look like? Sorry, my clicking doesn't always seem to want to work. Well, we've known for some time already that faculty support of student writing is important. Retention researchers and the AAC and U have all identified faculty support of student writing as an important means to foster student persistence to graduation. They've specifically pointed to feedback on student writing projects as something that is valuable and for giving them that developmental support. In addition, the AAC and U suggest that writing intensive courses could be an answer. They draw on significant research into student success in higher education. They designated 10 high impact practices to enhance student learning. One of those is writing intensive courses. And considering the research surrounding professional expectations of graduates and our unique population at UHCL, writing intensive courses would be a really good fit and a particular use to service the UHCL student population. So what exactly is a writing intensive course? Well, according to the AAC and U report, a writing intensive course emphasizes writing at all levels of instruction and across the curriculum, including final year projects. Students are encouraged to produce and revise various forms of writing for different audiences in different disciplines. That would help the teachers for sure. The effectiveness of this repeated practice across the curriculum has led to parallel efforts in such areas as quantitative reasoning, oral communication, information literacy, and on some campuses, ethical inquiry. And currently, 52% of American colleges and universities have a writing across the curriculum or writing in the disciplines program in place, thereby demonstrating the nationwide trend to emphasize written communication across disciplines. So what does that mean exactly? Research shows that meaningful writing instruction involves a combination of writing practices. One way of thinking about this is writing across the curriculum or writing to learn. This is where students use writing in low stakes situations as they endeavor to learn new course content. For example, you might engage 1-minute papers, discussion posts, reflective writing, and free writing. Then the flip side of that is writing in the disciplines or learning to write, which is the more high stakes writing situations where students are taught and then evaluated on disciplinary writing conventions. Examples here would be formal written assignments that employ the rhetorical modes of and the genres or conventions encountered in the discipline. So one objection I often hear when I suggest that students need to write more and in discipline-specific courses is, well, I don't have time to integrate any more writing into my courses, or I don't have the time to grade a lot of papers, et cetera. And so I want to reassure any of you that are thinking along those lines that the emphasis should be on quality, not quantity. And I'll explain that with data from the National Survey of Student Engagement. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with NSSE. This is a huge nationwide survey that is administered every year. NSSE annually collects information at hundreds of four-year colleges and universities about first-year and senior students' participation in programs and activities that institutions provide for their learning and personal development. The results provide an estimate of how undergraduates spend their time and what they gain from attending college. And the NSSE surveys are used for so many purposes. If you want to go check it out, I do recommend visiting their site. So about, I guess about 10 years ago now, some writing studies experts began collaborating with the NSSE survey folks, and they added some questions about writing specifically. And then what they were trying to find out is, well, what is going on with the writing that students are doing at college? And how useful is that writing both in fostering student engagement and in fostering student learning? So they added several questions to the NESI, and then they, when they analyzed their results, they found that the more frequently students work on meaning constructing assignments, engage in interactive writing activities, and receive clear expectations, they tend to engage in more deep learning activities, and they report greater gains in learning and development. The really cool thing is that these results persist after controlling for student characteristics such as gender, parental education, race, grades, and major. And it also persists after we filter out for the amount of reading and writing that students do. So that tells us, if you think about that working on meaning constructing assignments, engaging in interactive writing activities, and receiving clear expectations are each more important than the amount of writing that students do. So it doesn't really matter. We don't necessarily have to give them, so many papers to work on while they're here, but what we need to do is to help them make meaning. So those are goals to facilitate writing campus-wide should then become designing meaning-making activities, using interactive writing activities, and communicating clear expectations. And I would emphasize that last point in particular, because it's more so than just clear expectations in terms, certainly communicating clear expectations in terms of what we expect from them as students when they are submitting writing. But in addition, it is communicating expectations about what writing looks like in the professional world they are pursuing. So we should give them opportunities to make meaning through writing, and we should help them engage with both peers and instructors. And we should talk about what writing is, both in our own classes and in the profession at large, so that students can make those connections about the ways in which writing is going to be valuable for them now and in the future. And then it wouldn't be difficult to do that with not necessarily adding a large quantity of writing, but instead just being more explicit about the types of writing assignments we are using and why. Okay, and then so writing, so basically what I'm suggesting is that we move towards a writing across the disciplines approach in order to truly prepare our students for the written communication demands they will encounter over a lifetime. This would mean exposing them to varied writing tasks and discipline-specific writing instruction throughout their tenure at UHCL. So they're already required to engage in writing courses at the first year level and the junior level, but I think there's room to include writing in other places as well. And this would, of course, work to foster a culture that supports and encourages student development as professional writers by preparing instructors across the disciplines to teach process-centered meaning-making writing assignments and to use writing as a tool for learning course content. Which is something that I've already been working on here as part of with the Center for Faculty Development for the last 4 years. And that basically brings me to the end. So I am happy to turn this over to questions and conversation with Dr. Kelling.
Thank you very much for the lovely presentation. I've heard some of this before in your faculty development workshops. It's really nice to see it kind of in a different framing. I really love that message that we don't have to cram, more giant papers into our classes. I know that we're all feeling like many times our classes are just packed in, and so that this idea that less can be more, that if we have, kind of more of the meaningful writing assignments with clear expectations, that students can get a lot out of what we are assigning. So that is such a great message. And I love how much you're trying to kind of change UHCL to better prepare students for these careers. I do have a few questions, so I'll start us off. Of course, as a psych professor, I'm definitely a little bit interested in the psychology side of it.
Sure.
So what type of employers were you reaching out to? Obviously we have the undergrad degree, we have a lot of different masters. Were you looking for ones that are employing undergrads straight out of UHCL or after they get a master's?
So most of the psychologists, there was some variety there, but most of them were they had a lot of interns at the undergraduate level, but most of their hires had a master's degree or something higher than that. So they were probably thinking mostly about what's happening at the master's degree level or higher. But what was interesting to me with the psychologists was how much they emphasized the specific word choice and how that would influence decisions that were made. I think I'm just noticing that it got really dark in the room I'm in, but they really focused on the idea that it was their responsibility to choose the right word to frame the situation specifically. A lot of them were working with the legal system, and a lot of them were working with juveniles who had, were in really difficult situations. One of the companies was a foster adoption agency, and also also does counseling sessions for children in the adoption and foster care system, which I'm sure comes with a lot of counseling involved. So those were children that had suffered trauma and were at major crossroads in their lives. And so that was something that was a particular emphasis for those psychologists in particular.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And another methodology question.
Sure.
For your focus groups, were you doing them with individuals across the areas, or were they by discipline? So were they kind of bouncing each other ideas off of an accountant and a psychologist, or was it all psychologists in one focus group kind of thing?
Yes, excellent question. It was discipline specific groups. And the reason we decided to do it that way is we really wanted to get into the nuance. We were afraid that if we put mixed groups, then we would end up not ever getting to the real, the deep conversation about what it's like to write in psychology or what it's like to write in accounting. So they weren't all, so some of them were company specific, where everybody was like a psychologist and also worked for the same company, and some were not. So like the accountants, for example, and the educators as well were mixed. So they were all the same profession, but they were employed by all different places. And man, I got to tell you, the recruiting was so challenging all the way through it. It was just really, really difficult to get busy working professionals in the same room to have a conversation about these things. But we kept trying, and I think got some good results from it.
Yeah, that might be even easier now over Zoom, but you're probably really glad to have finished before we've transformed.
Exactly. We did have to do the education administrators over Zoom because we just could not get the principals and vice principals in a room together. They were just too busy. It was impossible. So those ended up being over Zoom, but all the rest were in person.
Great. So that shifts me to another question. So I think we talk a lot about how the pandemic has affected our classrooms. And, many faculty have responded by trying to cut down to kind of the bare bones of what we need to teach. What are my, main student learning outcomes? What can I take out? So how do you think kind of this mentality and the pandemic might impact how prepared our students are to tackle these aspects of their careers in the future? If we are cutting out our major paper, even if we're replacing it maybe with a few small writing things, are we doing a disservice to our students? Is there other things that we should think about?
So I think ideally students will benefit most from a combination of strategies in which they are getting some exposure to discipline specific genres and conventions, and also using writing as a strategy to learn more about the content. And of course, those things can be combined, but we want to think about it in terms of those low stakes. I don't have to worry so much about the grammar or about what I'm the way I'm shaping my sentence, and instead focus just on what I'm thinking about. That would be the low stakes writing sort of situation. Discussion prompts are a great way to do that, or writing at the beginning of class. I use what I call sacred writing time, in which I prompt students to write for 5 minutes at the beginning of every class session. I find that helps get the conversation going and helps loosen them up before class, etc. So whether it's that kind of writing or whether it's papers, ideally we want them to get exposure to both. But if I had to make decisions about it, given the situation, I think if there was some collaboration or coordination between instructors within the discipline, maybe one class focuses more on the writing to learn aspect, maybe at that sophomore or junior level, whereas at the senior level and of course in the graduate level, focusing more on the exposing students to the genre conventions and what the expectations are of what writing is going to look like in their fields. Did I answer that? I think I did.
And a follow-up that came in actually from the Q&A is kind of like, do you think some courses are doing more writing because we are remotely than maybe they're doing, more engaged or in the asynchronous, more asking students to take on more of that lifting? And, how does that change how we think about writing if we are remote? So I know you mentioned it's like a few ideas, but kind of, is there any other aspects that shift with us being, not in the same room?
Yeah, I think you're right that another thing to consider is that in an asynchronous model, they're getting more writing off the bat because classroom discussion is automatically replaced with written discussion, for example. Any communication they want to have with, aside from those who visit during office hours, the majority of the conversations they're going to have with the instructor are written, et cetera. So I do think that there is more writing happening. And I do think that in hindsight, when we're looking back on the pandemic many years from now, we will find that there were some benefits to that because we kind of forced students to really embrace what writing is going to look like in the workplace in a very rapid way. And because that's what the workplace is having to do too. So in many ways, we have automatically adapted ourselves to be more reflective of what's happening in the workplace. But in other ways, I fear that we are being less explicit about that because it's just assumed that, oh, okay, well, it's an asynchronous class, so therefore you have to do everything in writing. And I don't know how much conversation is happening with students about the value and importance of writing in that field or the value and importance of that specific assignment, both of which I think are important for students to understand in order to get the most out of it for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think that can sometimes be lacking, especially as we scrambled last spring and summer to put our courses online and rethink everything, that it's hard to remember that they do need that message of why it's so important to learn writing and why each assignment is valuable. So another question that came in, when you talked about your big findings, the third one, someone mentioned might be very surprising to many students. And how can we get this finding out to the UHCL community? I don't know if you want to pull it back up, or it was, I believe it's the one on the writing versus technical skills.
Here is what we're thinking of. Yeah. So I heard this most often from the accountants and the healthcare administrators, but it did come up in all four groups. And so what was interesting about it, so from the accountant's point of view, and they kind of debated this in one of the interviews, this was a debate for several minutes in which they were talking about what was more important, technical skills or written communication. And the conclusion that they drew together as a group, which highlights one of the cool aspects of a focus group interview design, is that together they kind of reached a consensus that they would prefer new hires with strong communication skills because they felt as if the technical skills would come with time, naturally, that they were more qualified to teach those skills. And whereas they felt less confident in their ability to support new hires in written communication. I found this ironic though, because it was the same group that was talking about the ways in which they were giving very detailed feedback. They were asking for multiple drafts of like, say, a letter to a client or even an email before they would let the new hire send anything out. And this was common practice. Like many of them talked about this. The administrators too, the healthcare administrators also talked about it. And from their point of view, and they were talking specifically about the difference between an ASN and a BSN, the associate nursing and the bachelor's nursing. And they felt that the Bachelor of Nursing degree had those graduates came in better prepared to do the communication stuff. And that was something that was important to them. And so they, in their field, had a direct comparison where there's 2 degrees that one doesn't get very much exposure to the core subjects. It really is just focuses on technical skills, and another degree that has that more well-rounded attribute of having writing and including those things. And so they had a direct comparison right in front of them. And they were talking about how they were basically rewriting their job ads to focus more on the BSNs. They were preferring that degree. They were preferring them to bring them on. And they even talked about how it was common that the BSNs wouldn't be as technically skilled, but that it was worth the trade-off. And they were happy to do that. So that was what was interesting about those. So how can we share this finding at UHCL? I talk about this a lot in my classes myself. So I know that's something that I have made a point to do. I have certainly brought it up already in presentations that I have been a speaker. I would love to be able to talk about that more widely at UHCL. And I think the press release that got us ready for this, for the HSH Presents, did talk about that. So maybe that's one way, is to think about it more in terms of how could we market that, or how could we make ourselves kind of that niche university that accommodates that need. I think there's room for us to focus more on the liberal education aspect of our students, no matter what their major is. And I think that could be really valuable in a way for UHCL to distinguish itself.
Yeah, nice. So it's pretty obvious why you focused on the 4 majors you did. Do you think that there are lessons learned that do or do not carry over to other majors? Like, are there some aspects of it that might be different?
Yeah, it's hard to predict, I suppose. I'm thinking about it in terms of, so other areas that I've talked with people more about is in engineering and in computer science. And some of the stuff is almost universal. Like you hear a lot of the time, basically, we want our graduates to have more writing experience. That is something that is pretty common, and I hear a lot across disciplines. But the how to do it is the part that is, that's also talked about a lot, but is definitely more discipline specific and where to work it in. You and I have talked about it before, about how it's relatively easy to work it into psychology because it's already so much a part of the philosophy. It's already so, whereas in computer science and in engineering, they struggle with, well, how do we do this? What does this look like for our students? And that's not to say, that's just to point out that they just have less experience and exposure to that kind of training. But what's interesting is in those disciplines, I could include accounting to that to some degree, is there's definitely a recognition that they want to make the change. There's resistance in how to fit it in with all of the other stuff they feel like that needs to be taught. And I think maybe that message of, we can loosen up on the technical skills a little bit and it'll still be okay, might be the way to solve that problem for them. I don't know. But that's one thing that I see across disciplines, is that, great, how do I do this?
Maybe a follow-up with some of the members of our cohort that were in those kind of fields that
exactly
do the writing. And I remember from the QEP training, someone expressed the idea that you can often tell in a page or two what the paper is going to be like, and that sometimes you don't need the 10 or 15 to know that, yeah, and like you were talking about the meaningful writing assignments, they don't necessarily have to be super long.
That's true.
So we have another question that came in. Are there specific ways we can help students identify and define these skills they learn when they are applying for jobs?
Wait, can you say that for me one more time? I'm sorry.
Yes. Are there specific ways we can help students identify and define these skills they learn when they're applying for jobs?
Okay, so one thing that did come up a lot, and it was one of the things that kind of made me cringe a bit, but they talked a lot about the ways in which they evaluate new hires when they are in the hiring process. And of course, resumes were very important in having an error-free resume. So that certainly is one thing. I don't know how much we really talk about that out loud. I'm sure career services does, but I don't know. I don't know beyond that how much that's really emphasized, that it needs to be pristine. They also, a lot of the fields also required additional writing of some kind. Education often would require some sort of an essay or a response to a prompt as part of the interview process. And the accountants judged a lot based on the oral interview. And so they even talked a bit about how sometimes they could be misled because they would assume that somebody was, if they could communicate orally, then that meant they could communicate in writing, and that isn't always the case. And in healthcare administration, they talked about looking at the transcripts and really studying to see like whether they had some courses that they assumed would be ones that focused on writing. So I would say for students, what we need to do is help them recognize that written communication is like literally the number one thing that you will see in most job ads. Like there was a study recently in which they pulled job ads randomly off of Indeed, and like 90% of them referenced written communication skills as being important. So I think we need to help students make that connection. And I think we need to help them find ways to articulate that somewhere in their job application materials. Like, so maybe there is a specific section on the resume that says writing experience or communication skills. Maybe there is, maybe they almost turn it into a little mini CV in which they include a presentation they have included or they have performed. Maybe they just simply reference it in the cover letter. And that's something that we talk to career services about in terms of helping them kind of really focus on, well, how can we punch up written communication skills? But I think honestly, the most important thing is to be explicit in our classrooms about the value of writing in the profession. And so that then slowly over time, students make that connection themselves. If they hear it over and over again, eventually they'll figure that out too. And they'll be like, oh yeah, this is really important. I have to pay attention. I certainly notice it in my own classes that, obviously my focus is on writing, so I have some luxury there, but I spend all semester talking about its value. And by the end of the semester, they seem to get that. So I think it is important to do that work.
Yeah, I see some of that too, that sometimes on the evaluations, they'll be like, I was so worried when I saw how much writing there would be for this class, but it's really improved those skills. And I do appreciate that. And it's like, oh, good. But that's a very good point too, about maybe some sort of connection with career services that.
Yeah, I think there's room to do that because, there is, I think in my experience working with career services in the past, they welcome feedback from faculty. They want us to talk to them about what's important in their field. So I think we should collaborate more effectively with our support services and helping them, helping us work more effectively as a team in helping students get out there and get to the job market.
Let's see, does anyone else have other questions? You can just put them right into the Q&A. I want to make sure we're not missing any. Well, while we're waiting just to see if there are more, I'll ask another one.
Great.
So you've done the 4 majors. I know you said you're diving a little bit deeper into the healthcare and the accountant. Like, what are your next plans, your next steps that you're thinking through as you expand this and keep going on this path?
Yeah, so I will say that the pandemic has completely derailed all of my original plans. But so I've just finished a manuscript on the healthcare administration, and that's slated to come out in later this year. Next up is accountants. I've been working with a publication so I can get that one. It's still in drafting process. It's actually really early drafting process, but I think that will be next. And then I see, I would imagine I will need a break over the summer, but I think next fall I will start looking at psychology next. Part of me wants to add one more interview for the educator. So I'm still kind of debating about whether or not I want to go back and do that, because that was where I had the least participation. And part of me is like, no, we've got enough data, let's just roll. So I'll probably do psychology next to just to give myself more time to think about what I want to do with the educators. And then I also see further down, some comparison and contrast, what's happening between the all four of them, something more similar to what I was trying to do today, in which we think about, well, what does this tell us about workplace communication in the general sense? And what does this tell us about, how we should approach integrating writing on college campuses, and what does that look like? And so I think it would be a more pedagogical article down the road as well. So that's where I'm headed. I don't know. I would love to do more interviews. I think I would want to do the engineers and computer science folks next, because I think there is a demand for thinking about the STEM education, and I worry that we have gone too far down that emphasizing STEM and kind of forgetting that they still need those what they would call soft skills as well. And so I think there's room to do that as well next, but that's kind of where I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember seeing them recently. Someone was suggesting we should get away from soft skills and call them essential skills or something like that. But
I know,
they're so important.
Exactly. I hate the term soft skills. I think it's reductive, and but that's, so many of them will call them that. And it's it's one of those things we need to move away from, and in order to help students visualize exactly what we're talking about, which is that these are essential for every field.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. I know we're getting close to our hour. So I just want to thank you again for a very inspirational presentation for all of us to think about how we can better integrate writing into our courses. And thank you very much for everyone who tuned in and sent questions. And now we do want to preview our next HSH Presents, which is coming up on March 29th. Why is it okay to trust science, with the speaker being Dr. Keith Parsons and the moderator being Dr. Mike McMullen. So again, March 29th. Thank you very much for tuning in, and hopefully everyone has a great evening.
Oh, thanks, Anne. I don't know who's still here and who's not, but it's hard to tell who's here, to be honest with you, in this layout.
Yeah. It is a different format.
It is. Well, everybody will be glad to know that I do have power at my house. I just didn't turn the light on before we started.